Good evening. I am going to be reading this book, My Story, Wednesday 19th of May, and this would be many years ago. I'm writing everything down so that you, Edward, will know every place I have seen and how I presently live. Sydney Cove is grey and scrubby. It looks out into the harbour and across at the hills on the other side. Many of the convicts' huts have been built on rocks. They are so ramshackle, their foundations must ding like limpets, or a strong wind will send them into the water. At night our candles and oil lamps attract moths as big as birds and monstrous black beetles. There are also dozens of possums and large furry bats. My master says that because no one farms or owns this land, all animals are free to roam wherever they might wish. This book is ISBN 0439 98114X, written by Goldie Alexander. I'm dedicating it to my spiritual Australian daughter, Deborah Roll, and it's called The Diary of Elizabeth Harvey, about Australia in 1790. I've already read the book and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure that you will, Deborah. So this is being recorded for you, but I will upload it for the public because you never know, somebody else might like the story of early Australia, while the events described and some of the characters in this book may be based on actual historical events and real people. Elizabeth Harvey is a fictional character created by the author, and her diary is a work of fiction, but of course fact is threaded through it, which makes it very interesting. So Rose Hill, and it's all by dates, not chapters. Saturday, 3rd of April, 1790. Yesterday was Good Friday. Master Henry Dodd gathered his servants together to read the Lord's Prayer. He made us repeat it after him. Sarah says to never tell anyone that I know my letters. She fears that if the officers hear that I can read and write, they might decide to use me elsewhere, and this would separate us. But this morning, just after sunrise, I was doing the usual house dusting and sweeping when I heard someone say, "My life for one of those cabbages." My heart leapt into my mouth. Sydney Cove is full of murderers and thieves. What if one had come as far as Rose Hill? Holding my broom as a weapon, I tiptoed into the next room. A young Royal Marine was peering out at our garden. This book was under his arm. Catching sight of me, he blushed to the roots of his hair. Then he introduced himself as Winston Russell and told me that he was here to see Master Dodd. I took a deep breath and said, "Excuse me, sir, that book, is it something you can write in?" "Why, yes," he said. This is a journal." I bobbed a curtsy and tried not to show my excitement. My life for one of those cabbages? In this colony, food is power. I knew that I could trade food for just about anything. "Sir," I said, "I could not help overhearing." He reddened even further. "Could you think of exchanging that journal for a vegetable?" He licked his lips, as if tasting it already. "Maybe for carrots. A cabbage would be nice." I said, "Would an onion do?" He shook his head. "My sister Emily is sick. She pines for something fresh. Surely this book is worth 3. That journal, I could not take my eyes off it. In my mind, I could touch the clean, smooth paper and smell the leathery cover. But this harsh life as a convict has taught me to strike a hard bargain. I said quickly, "I have only 2. 3, he insisted. 2. I turned to leave. Done, he stammered as I reached the door. Before he could change his mind, I ran outside to where old Tom, Master Dodd's chief gardener, has planted rows of onions, carrots, potatoes, turnips, and cabbages. I knew what a risk I was taking. Governor Philip has told Master Dodd to punish any person caught stealing food. If someone saw me, I would get 100 lashes, and he be sent back to Sydney Cove. But for once my luck was in. No one was about. Stepping onto the bed, I pulled out 2 onions, hid them in my skirt, and ran back into the house. The Marine held out his hand, the fingers long and delicate, as any girl's, and went to take the onions. I held them behind me and told him to first give me the book. The corners of his mouth pulled tight. He carefully tore out some pages with writing on them, saying that I would need ink with which to write. He handed me a small bottle. Only then did we make the exchange. Before hiding the onions inside his jacket, he held them to his nose as if they were the rarest East Indies spice. The sun has gone down, and I have no candle. These southern skies are so vast. They make me dizzy just to look at them. Now the crickets are starting up. Their song almost deafens me. Tuesday, 6th of April, 1790. A fine warm day. All morning I helped Sarah launder our master's shirts and drape them over the bushes to dry. His poor shirts are so threadbare from too much wear and too much soaking in hot water and lye that they are almost transparent. Then back into the house to simmer a mutton shank and some wild spinach for our dinners. Sarah had intended for me to mend shirts until sunset, but as my hands are too red and puffy from washing to thread the needle, she has given me the afternoon to myself. First, I must finish recording last Saturday's events. After I gave the Marine his onions, I held this book to my chest and prayed for him to leave. The longer he stayed, the more trouble I could be in. But he had come with a message for Master Dodd, and see him he would. Settling into a chair, whilst assuring me that no word of this business would pass his lips, he said, did you not sail on the Lady Penrhyn? I was not surprised that he knew my face. So few of us sail to Botany Bay. Everyone here seems familiar. He wanted to know why I was so interested in books. I told him that it was not so much books as paper to write on. He paused to consider this. Then, "What is your name, child?" "Child?" I thought indignantly. From someone with skin as smooth as a baby's bottom. I bit my lip and stared at our feet, his in shabby holed boots and mine so bare and dusty. His eyes followed my gaze, and I felt his shock at glimpsing my scarred toes. He demanded to know how this had happened. I told him that the jailers in Portsmouth had asked for money. When I did not have any, they had promised me a lesson I would never forget. "Most memorable," was his dry response. Then once again he asked me for my name. I did not know what to do. My first thought was, what if he is caught carrying those onions? Might he not betray me? Then I considered how far he had gone to help his sister. To have risked so much for a loved one must show a kind heart. So I told him that I was Elizabeth HARVEY, then added that folk around here know me as Lizzie. He leant back in his chair, and this gave me time to look him over. Gingery curls fall around onto his collar, and his eyebrows are so thick they remind me of smudges of orange paint. He is short and slim, with fair, freckled skin, and his nose is crooked, as if he's been in one fight too many. He said, "Lizzie, why were you sent to Botany Bay?" "They said I stole a linen gown and a straw bonnet worth 7 shillings. A very bad crime indeed." "But it was not me who did it," I cried, now wishing that I'd kept my mouth shut. His gaze was disbelieving. "No convict ever admits her guilt." "Since I'm transported," I cried indignantly, "why must I bother to lie? And it's only a crime for those who do not have to steal to stay alive." I flushed and fell silent. Rudeness to a Marine could bring me a flogging. I waited for him to dismiss me. Instead, he said, "Where are you from?" "Cranham, a village in the Cotswolds. After my parents died, I was sent to London to find work." "So you know how to shape your letters?" "As this is unusual for girls from poor families, some masters claim that too much learning will turn us into bad servants." I told him that our vicar had thought me clever enough to learn. He said, "But now that I have your onions, won't you be too hungry to write?" "Perchance," I replied, "but as there is no paper left in all of Rose Hill, this book is worth a little hunger." He leaned forward, his clear gaze seeming to see right through me. "Why is this journal so important?" I sighed to myself. Nothing for it but the truth, keeping one eye on the door in case Master Dodd came in. I told him how I had left you, my little brother Edward, in Cranham, and how you would surely wish to know that I was still alive. If anything, this puzzled the Marine, and he asked me how this book might help. I told him that I planned to use it to describe my present life and a little of how I came to be here. Then I intend posting it to you, Edward, on the very first vessel sailing home. By now it was mid-morning, and Sarah Burke would be wondering where I was. I bobbed the Marine a curtsy, and praying that Master Dodd would not smell those onions on him, tucked the journal under my shawl and ran towards the kitchen. Like the rest of Rose Hill, this room is no more than a hut made of wattle branches lined with mud. There are 2 tiny glass-less windows. The only furniture is a rough table, several makeshift benches, and a couple of straw pallets piled into a corner. This is where Sarah and I sleep. Large boilers of hot water sit on either side of the hearth. When it rains, we must dry our clothes on lines blackened by fumes from the fire. Sarah never allows this fire to go out. In summer, this hut is so hot we can hardly breathe. Sarah is Master Dodd's housekeeper, and she rules his servants with an iron rod. Since we found each other in Newgate prison, she has been my constant friend and protector, while she prepared our master's dinner of salted pork, dried peas, and the end of a cabbage. I showed her the journal. I had hoped she would be pleased for me. Instead, she scowled suspiciously and wanted to know how I had got it. Of course I told her. Then all she could say was, "Why risk a flogging for a book?" "He won't tell," I suddenly replied. His sister was sick, and he was too hungry to bother with anything else. She dumped another kettle on the hearth and cried, "What if someone saw you? What if Master Dodd gets to hear of it?" I only bartered my share of the crop. Since when did words feed you better than onions? When a food is scarce, nothing else matters. If you steal from here, we all suffer. She picked up a turnip. I ducked under the table. This would not be the first time Sarah had thrown something at me in a rage. She said, "And another thing, if you speak to the men, you put yourself in danger." She tossed the turnip into the boiling water. "Never walk outside without pulling down your bonnet and covering your chest." But I saw this as a good morning's work. Winston Russell had risked a flogging to care for his sick sister, and I had found a way of writing to you, my little brother. Though it is 4 long years since we last were together, you're always in my thoughts. I often dream that you are sleeping beside me as you once did. Wednesday, 7th of April, 1790. All morning Sarah had me fetching pails of water from the river. Master Dodd had told her to make his cottage as clean as possible. This cottage is little more than a hut, with a beaten earth floor and always dusty. This is not easy. Perchance our master is hoping for another visit from Governor Philip. Before my master settled in Rose Hill, he once worked for the governor, and they are the best of friends. Sarah says that the governor thinks Master Dodd the most trustworthy man in all Port Jackson, though she also adds that my master puts too much faith in God and not enough in hard work to get us out of our misery. But it seems to me that if all my master says about God is true, and if God were listening, then our poor lives would not be this sad. Yet I would never dare to say this aloud, as surely I would be flogged for blasphemy. I was coming up from the river, a pail in each hand, when Simple Sam jumped out from behind some trees, eyes rolling like a cart wheels, spittle flying everywhere, and he cried, "Ah, come with me!" I got such a fright, I nearly dropped both pails. "Not now, Sam," I said impatiently. "Can't you see that I'm busy?" Sarah says that I should look out for Simple Sam and not let him come too close. But I know that Sam just wants to play, though playing is difficult in that he has a man's face and body, but he speaks and thinks like a baby. Sam's story is as sad as a tale as I ever heard. Once he was a clever villain and counterfeiter, but one day he got careless enough for the police, the London police, the runners, to catch him and take him to Newgate prison. There, the jailers thumped him so hard, he ended up a half-wit. Today, his face was almost hidden by a tangled beard and shaggy mane of black hair. Scum dribbled from his nose, and there was more dirt on him than you would find in a clay pit. The other convicts tease him unmercifully. They steal his food and rum and never let him sleep in their huts. They say he stinks like a weasel. Today, I would have no problem with Sam, except for a couple of women watching from the doorway of one of the huts. They started calling Sam and me names and making certain rude gestures. I let fly with a few names myself. Then, setting my cap firmly on my head, I hurried to where Sarah was waiting for the water. Dearest Edward, it is tiresome living alongside villains, drunks, and idiots. But I suppose I should be grateful that I am still alive. Thursday, 8th of April, 1790. We are a long day's walk from Sydney Cove. Excuse me a moment, I have a tickle. Oh, my nose. Any news is slow to arrive. However, we now know that the Navy ship Supply has sailed into Port Jackson. It came to report that the flagship Sirius, which was coming from Cape Town with food and other supplies, has been wrecked on a reef at Norfolk Island. "Have you anything else to report?" Sarah demanded of the sailor who came to deliver this sad news. The sailor was half crazed from drinking too much rum. He laughed so hard we could see his blackened stumps. "Why," he cried, "too much sun has addled Lieutenant Maxwell's brain. He rowed around the harbour for 2 whole days. We had to send out another boat to rescue him from the Middle Ed." "Poor man. I wonder he is still alive. Sharks live in those waters, and they make a quick meal of anyone unlucky enough to fall in." "More like he's mad from lack of food." Sarah threw more wood on the fire. "Was there a service for Good Friday?" "Surely there was," he said. "The Reverend Dr. Williams held it in the storehouse, but no one had the strength to pray too loud." "Was there a goodly attendance?" His shrug told us that he did not know, and what is more, that he didn't care. In this kitchen it is always dusk. Crouching in the shadows, I had hoped the sailor would notice the not notice the mutton bone Sarah had left on the table. To my horror, he lunged forward to grab it. "Stealing our food!" Though my heart bucketed with fright, I kicked and scratched him like a wildcat. Finally, Sarah came to the bone's rescue. The sailor held his head where she had punched it. "What's up, missus?" "Off with you or take more of this." She kicked his leg so hard you could almost hear the bone shatter. The sailor shrieked loud enough to waken the dead. Then he ran down the hill like the devil himself was chasing him. We watched him disappear behind a clump of spindly trees. "Thinks he can try anything for a ship's biscuit," she said to me. I said, "What will happen to those poor folk in Sydney Cove?" Her grim smile revealed where the jailers in Newgate had knocked out her front teeth. "Who knows, Lizzie? Even our strongest convicts are too weak to do a day's work, and the land around Sydney Cove isn't worth farming." I stared into the fire. "Perchance the crops on Garden Island will grow enough to feed those folks." She snorted and went on preparing the master's dinner. "Anything planted on Garden Island is already stolen. You and me, we're best off at Rose Hill, where there is something to put in our bellies. Even if we had food to spare, we have no carts to carry it to Sydney Cove." Her scowl grew worse. "Now, missy, you've more to do than stand around gossiping." But I could tell from her eyes that she is as worried as I am. Late last night, I glimpsed a band of Indians, or Aborigines, as Master Dodd calls them, lurking further down the hill. When I pointed them out to Sarah, she thought they would probably come to steal our sheep. She thought them savages who did not know right from wrong. I told her that I would like to ask them why they paint their bodies to look like actors in a theatre pantomime. At this she laughed very loudly and said, Ask away as much as you like. You'll only get nonsense. When we landed at Botany Bay, all they did was cry, "Warra, warra!" I said, perhaps that was their way of welcoming us. They seem gentle enough, even if they wear no clothes. Has not Governor Philip made the native Banilon into his own servant? Sure, the poor man'll be murdered in his own bed. And she made sure the kitchen door was firmly bolted from the inside. Friday, 9th of April, 1790. Old Tom came to warn us to watch out for snakes. He says last night one crept into the hen yard and stole 2 chickens. "I seen that thief well enough," he said, pointing to his good eye. "A brown monster, 6 foot long, would steal a child easy as a fowl." Even Sarah shivered, and nothing much scares her. "Snakes terrify me." Old Tom says there are hundreds out there, all different shapes and sizes. He has seen some with diamond scales like fish, others that sit on their tails and pivot around like wooden tops. During the day, there are large jumping ants that carry a most vicious sting. At dusk, mosquito bites raise welts that itch so badly we scratch them into sores. But to make up for the insects, there are thousands of colourful birds. Most interesting are the parrots. There are flocks of pink, grey and white parrots with mustard crests, black parrots with black and yellow crests, and parrots with red, green, yellow and blue feathers, old Tom calls rose-hillers. I'm most amused by a large-beaked, dull-feathered bird who laughs whenever he sees me, and some large black and white birds that sing like angels also. And if I'd not seen this with my own eyes, I would find this hard to believe. There are flightless birds almost as big as ponies that run in flocks through this valley. We came expecting to find man-eating lions and tigers. Instead, this country abounds with kangaroos, strange creatures that hop along on strong back legs. Old Tom says the only animals to fear are the snakes, as their venom can kill a dog. Also, a certain black spider that builds tunnels in the ground. Tom calls widowmakers. Still, everything here is upside down. Instead of leaves, bark drops off the trees. Winter is summer, spring is autumn. 2 years ago, when we first settled in Port Jackson, Governor Philip gathered us together and told us in his quiet way that without caring for our seeds and animals, this colony would never survive. As a result, our cattle, sheep, and all the poultry are looked after as if they are King George III's own property. Unlike Botany Bay and Port Jackson, the soil at Rose Hill is rich and deep. Late last year, we managed to grow a 26-pound cabbage. It is my job to gather wild spinach to make soup. Sarah brews licorice-flavoured tea from a creeper growing close by. Master Dodd has told Sarah, and he had heard it from the governor, that this is a sure cure for scurvy. Last week, Sarah and old Tom went to Sydney Cove to barter vegetables for meat. She came back with a dozen small fish that she rationed out very carefully. What I would do for some salted mutton or pork, I moaned. Barely any left, she said briskly, and what's left is more maggot than meat. Some of the convicts are sick with starvation. Why don't they shoot more game? No shot for the muskets. The men are too weak to track kangaroos, though some eat possum. She was busy shaping weevilly flour into johnny cakes. Now all they can do is fish. But with only 2 rowing boats and a dozen nets, their catch is poor. She went on to explain how each person's ration is 2.5 pounds, including the fish's head, skin and bone. Some of the men worry that they will die of starvation if that is all they eat. I stared at her in amazement. What I would give for more of that sweet white flesh. Last night I dreamed that I was back in Cranham. I was walking along the track that led to home. In this dream I could see every hedgerow and dandelion, but when I arrived home, who should be there to greet me but Sarah? Edward, you were still a fat baby, and Sarah was holding you in her arms. Where is Mamma? I asked her. She smiled at me and said, Your Mamma has gone away. I am to be yours and Edward's Mamma now. At this you burst into loud sobs and woke me up. When I told Sarah my dream, she held me very close. Then, as if mightily embarrassed, she sent me to check the hen yard for eggs, even though she knows the hens are hardly laying. Saturday, 10th of April, 1790. We are so busy cleaning the master's house. It is hard to find time to write in my journal. Then this quill made horrid blots, and I had to raid the hen yard for a fresh feather. The cock crowed so loudly, old Tom came running. In spite of Tom's scarred face, which could frighten even the bravest heart, he has a soft spot for children. He cast his one good eye over the hens. They were busy scratching up the dust, and said, Thought I'd catch another of those thieving Indians. Last week, an aborigine was caught spearing a pig, and old Tom had him severely flogged for it. He later reported that his tribe set up enough crying and wailing to waken the dead. But Edward, I must ask myself why people are whipped for trying to stay alive. It would seem most strange if they lay down meekly to die of starvation. Not that Governor Philip would agree. He's determined to deal most severely with anyone caught stealing food. I later said to Sarah, What if those Indians think all food is there for the taking? She looked at me most oddly. Why would they think that? Well, I hesitated. Someone told old Tom that the Indians do not keep animals or grow crops. He says that they stay alive through hunting Whoever catches the animal, why, he gets to share it with whoever he chooses." She sighed impatiently. "Lizzie, you have such queer notions. After all we've been through, I reckon you'd show more sense. And something you should know. Old Tom says someone's been stealing his onions." My heart nearly stopped beating. "Does he know it was me?" She placed her hands on her hips. "Why should he?" "Well, I paused uncertainly. "Who does he think stole them?" "An Indian, or one of the men." "But Lizzie," her voice rose warningly, "promise me no more thieving." That I did, but she has accepted that I must, that I will write, then warns me to do so in private. "Edward, you will want to know what my friend Sarah looks like. She is a big woman, tall and strong, with a mop of unruly brown curls that defy any attempt to brush into order. Yesterday she stood over me, admiring the way I shape my letters. Though I know that she cannot read these pages, I am careful not to write anything that might annoy her. While I was waiting for this page to dry, she picked it up, saying that she could hardly see the marks for looking. Then she told me to mix more charcoal into the ink. I have offered to teach her the alphabet, but she says she's better things to do than waste her time with learning. At last a cool breeze wafts over Rose Hill. It reminds me of home. Edward, my stomach aches with loneliness. Sometimes I dream that the bush outside our window has disappeared. I'm no longer in this immense land where everything is grey and lonely. Instead, I'm back in Cranham, surrounded by green fields and low stone hedges. Jonquils and daffodils grow in the round green hills beyond our cottage. The air is misty with rain. Holding your small hand in mine, I run to where Mama and Papa wait for us with a warm supper. Then tears roll down my cheeks as I remember that Mama and Papa are no longer alive. That 4 long years must pass before we can be together. Sarah says we must make the best of what we have. Last night, for maybe the 100th time, she told me how she was still a baby when her real mother gave her to Mistress Sally Tompkins, who ran a home for unwanted children. This filthy old woman was the closest Sarah ever knew as a mother. She fed Sarah just enough to keep her alive and dressed her in rags. But as soon as Sarah was old enough to walk, she sent her into the streets to pick up whatever she could find. Sometimes it was a gentleman's watch or a purse filled with money, and once a splendid top hat. "What if you could not find anything?" I asked. Her gaunt face took on a slow smile. "Then I'd make myself cry, so people would throw me pennies." When I asked Sarah if she ever did meet her own mother, tears ran down her cheeks. To add to her misery, she gave birth to a stillborn boy while we were still in the hulks, waiting to be transported. It is a miracle that Sarah is still alive. In prison, Most of the pregnant women got very sick and died. She tells me that if God were to bless her with another baby, she would look after it with her last breath. She pretends to be tough as mahogany, but she's really very emotional. Meanwhile, she cries, clutching me to her bony chest. You, Lizzie, can be my child. I always hug her back, though she's all ribs and bones, not at all like our own mamma, who was soft and comfortable. Also, the few teeth Sarah has left have rotted from the terrible food we had in prison, and her breath stinks something terrible. Still, I am lucky to have such a faithful companion, even though sometimes I would wish that she was more my age. It is not that I am ungrateful to Sarah for all she has done for me. If it were not for her, I would now be mad or dead. But Sarah will treat me as a child when I no longer feel like one. Our early years were so different from hers. Edward, can you recall sitting on Mamma's lap while she sewed? I remember pricking myself on her needle, though Mamma scolded me for not being more careful. Papa kissed the spot until it felt better. Another time I remember Mamma lying on her bed, her brow damp with sweat. Mistress Bowen from next door shooed me outside, even though it was snowing and fearfully cold. Then hearing the cry of a newborn baby, that baby was you. For a long time you were so quiet, we thought you would not live. Mamma had already birthed 4 sons, and all had died. But with the warmer weather, your health picked up. By the time you could sit up by yourself, you were smiling and watching everything I did, as if you needed to learn it all. No more writing. Sarah's calling for more logs for the fire. Saturday, 11th of April, 1790. Before prayers, Sarah asked me to carry a basket with turnip and potato tops to Mistress Herrick's. Also a potion steeped with a clearing oil. Since last winter, the Herrick's elder children have had poor chests. Sarah is anxious to hear if they are spitting blood. If they are, we know their chances are not so good. If they are, but Mistress Herrick's assured me that the poultice is helping very nicely. Her youngest child, Johnny, is barely 6 months old. When he sees me, he breaks into a gummy smile. I love to hold him. He is as plump as you used to be, Edward. His little hands and feet are so sweet and unused. They remind me of starfish. Mistress Herrick's lives in a hut they share with another family. I saw a dozen pallets propped against the walls. Even those that live in the family huts are very cramped. My master keeps over 100 men and women convicts at Rose Hill to help with the crops. But old Tom has no respect for the men. He says they would not know a cabbage from a monkey. He says that if he didn't keep watch, they would pull up every potato plant thinking they were weeds. Since these are city folk who have never pulled a potato out of the ground, It is hardly surprising, but I would never say this aloud. Old Tom would most likely strike me if I said something he disliked. He can be most unfair. Perchance someone should remind him that last February those same men managed to harvest a little grain and vegetables. The single men sleep 10 to a hut, sometimes even more. The single women are a little more comfortable, but I hate to walk between those huts, as both men and women call rude things and make rude gestures to every passer-by. Remember to make yourself small, Sarah reminded me before I left. The day was warm. Still I wrapped my shawl about me so no one could see that I am starting to become a woman. Not that Sarah is pleased that I'm growing up. She insists that I'm best off trying to stay a child, and thinks it is a good thing that I am only 4 feet 10. As I walked, I recalled our first 2 years in this colony. They have been so hard. Landing at Botany Bay, we found hardly any fresh water, so the governor decided that we should sail further north to Port Jackson. What followed was 18 months of sleeping in tents and quarrelling over rations. We were always hungry. Our first crops withered. Many of our animals escaped into the bush or ate poisonous grasses and died. Even the fish would no longer take our baits. It seemed to Sarah and myself that we would surely die. That is, until the day she heard that Master Dodd was looking for a housekeeper. She went to him saying, "I promised to never steal from you, not even a morsel, were I dying of hunger." Master Dodd thought it rare to come across such an honest convict. He gave her the job and allowed her to bring Rose Hill whoever she might choose, and this is how I happen to be here. I hear her calling. I had best leave this for later. Wednesday, 14th of April, 1790. This year we have hardly any rain, but last night it poured as if the heavens must empty. Today an ocean of mud surrounds us. All the hard work Sarah and I had managed in Master Dodd's house has been undone. Our master saw our disappointment and told us not to despair. He assured us that one day we would have a better house that will be easier to clean. It will be built of bricks and mortar and have proper wooden floors and glass windows and green grass and stone paths leading up to it. Though his grizzled face and voice remained gruff, his eyes twinkled. He added, "I think mostly for Sarah's benefit that it will have a fine set of oak stairs and at least a dozen bedrooms." I wish that he had not teased her. Now she will not stop complaining how hard it will be to look after so many rooms. Friday, 16th of April, 1790. On this side of the equator, this season is autumn. But how can you tell the seasons apart when there is no snow and most of the days are the same? What we have here is wet or hot, or dry and hot, though not as hot as it was in February and March. If only this was an English spring, I said to Sarah as we spread laundry on bushes to dry. She straightened up to wipe her forehead with the back of her hand. All I ever knew of spring was melting snow and mud cold enough to freeze the marrow in me bones. I had to agree that spring in the city is different from spring in the country. Spring in the Cotswolds, I said dreamily. It makes me think of wild hares, daffodils and swallows, big white swans, foxes and finches, and running through grass so green it hurts my eyes to look at it. That sent Sarah into gales of laughter. More like in the city it's warm enough to melt what folk leave in the streets. Spring ain't no blessing if you happen to be poor. I nodded ruefully. She is right. London is the dirtiest, most foul place in the whole wide world if you are only a servant girl, though Sydney Cove is not much better. Sarah threw me another damp sheet to spread over a bush. Best you get over your grieving for Granham, was her advice. I have promised myself not to be so homesick, but I have no such control over my sleep. Many nights I dream that I'm back home with Mama, Papa, and you. Edward, you are still a baby. Suddenly some dread person is knocking on our door. He has come to carry me away. I'm going to stop there because there's quite a lot to read, and this is almost the hour, so I shall continue that in a bit. So Deborah, I'll be dividing it up because when I think there's a break that should come, and then I'll restart again. So you're going to hear the rest of it, but I don't think I can do it all in one video. It'll be very, very long if I do. So God bless you, sending you peace and prayers to Australia and this story, especially for you.